How we doing, folks? It's Wardy here, and as you guys can see, we're back at it, breaking down all the latest news and rumblings in Mets land. And today, that being November 13th, 2025, even though I'm technically recording this the night prior because, one, I just finished my live stream with Draftneck Mark Luino, one of the biggest talking heads in all the baseball and Mets space. Check out our live stream from this past night, everybody, as we got into all the key takeaways from the GM meetings to this point, from David Stearns to Scott Boras to what we know to this point on Alonso and Diaz, because today, folks, we have significant reporting to get into regarding where things stand between Pete Alonso and the New York Mets and the active contract negotiations. And key word there is active. From there, we're not only going to talk about Alonso and the current status there, but we're also going to get into Tyrone Taylor and Nate Lavender. Nate Lavender, remember him, the spring training darling from 2 years ago? Well, folks, after being picked up by the Tampa Bay Rays in the Rule 5 draft, he is back in the organization and will look to compete for a bullpen spot this spring. So we'll expand more on Lavender, his game, what you guys need to know about him, along with Tyrone Taylor, as there's been some uncertainty as to if he will be returning to the Mets next season, and they're going to be tendering him a contract or not, but we do have clarity as to what the Mets are going to be doing on that front, so we'll get into what is the latest with Tyrone, and to wrap up the show, we have some key rumblings to get into regarding both Byron Buxton and Ketel Marte, two of the best bats in all of baseball right now, and both of which could find themselves actually traded this offseason. Ketel Marte we expected, but Byron Buxton, not so much, so we're going to expand as to who exactly these players are in case you've been living under a rock, their upside, their potential downside, how they would be potential fits for the Mets maybe versus not, and ultimately why the Mets have already been in the market for one of these players and will likely be in the market for both here in the coming days to weeks. That and a whole lot more Mets land is what we're going to break down, so sit back, relax, and get yourself ready for the ride here on WardyNYM. All I ask is that you guys hit that like and subscribe button on your way in, as it's a fantastic way to support the platform. Help us get to 36,000 subscribers, because once we hit our latest 1,000 sub goal here on the platform, because after every new 1K we hit, we give away one Mets jersey of whatever player you want on the roster to one lucky subscriber in a future live stream. So hit those buttons if you haven't already. Let me know your initial thoughts and reactions in the comments down below, and shout out to our amazing sponsors at SeatGeek that have you covered for all things on the ticketing front, folks. SeatGeek, what I love so much about them is not only do they have over 70,000 active events to choose from, making them the #1 rated ticketing app in the game today for a reason, but their grading scale system, their app is just so easy to utilize. It's clear and concise. If it's in the red range 1 through 4, it ain't a good bang for your buck for a ticket. If it's in the 7 through 10 range in the green, it's a fantastic bang for your buck, and you should probably seek that. So whether you need it for NHL tickets, NFL tickets, NBA tickets, we're looking at comedy shows, concert shows, or like me this Saturday, all thanks to my friends at SeatGeek, I'll be attending that 1 p.m. game at Citi Field, Team Puerto Rico versus Team Dominican Republic. Cannot wait to see many amazing Mets fans there, as well as the massive card for UFC at Madison Square Garden that same night. Jam-packed day, and I simply cannot wait to be back there in New York and be hanging out with you amazing fans. But all thanks to our great friends at SeatGeek. Use our promo code, link down below, Wardy10, that is WARDY10. That way you too get 10% off your next ticket purchase with our awesome friends there at SeatGeek. Without further ado, everybody, let's hop right into today's discussion, and let's begin our discussion regarding the status of Pete Alonso and the New York Mets. And then from there, naturally, we'll talk about all the other rumblings and Mets land for each and every one of you. But I really do not want to waste any more time with this one. So now let's go from looking at the awesome Pete highlights to getting into this exact reporting here, folks. And let's begin, as you guys can see here, let's go down, because I'm a schmuck and didn't have it set up the way that I want to. I have no one else to blame but myself. And you guys can see here, Mets Alonso off to pleasant, productive start in talks. Better feeling this time around, and in here, rundown of potential teams, including a surprise or two. So, what is this key report from John Heyman of the New York Post over the past night, you might ask? Well, it is the following. The Mets have officially begun their active contract negotiation talks with Pete Alonso, and as we currently are perceiving things from what we know publicly, things are trending in a better direction faster than how they were a calendar year ago. And it's not overly surprising to see this, but rather it's comforting to see this, as there's been a lot of speculation as to, oh, David Stearns does not want Pete Alonso back at all because of his lack of defensive upside, or how could Pete Alonso be a part of the Mets' future plans if they're really going to prioritize defense? Well, folks, one goes in hand with the other. And not only are the Mets actively involved in contract negotiations with Scott Boras and Pete Alonso right now, I'm sure there's an adamancy to get this contract done sooner than, say, February is what we saw last year, because Alonso dragged it as long as he could, did not anticipate the qualifying offer to hurt his market as much as it did, was probably slighted by that as a first-time free agent, and then had to come to terms with the fact that the Mets were really the only team that was going to be bringing him back at the dollars he was looking for, knowing the qualifying offer really impacted a lot. Fast forward a year later, the QO is no longer attached to Alonso. You can speak to any team, but for rightful reason, there's a level of interest from Alonso to return to the Mets, being the home run king. And for the Mets and David Stearns, who spoke to the media and said himself over the past 24 hours that he would have loved to bring back both Alonso and Edwin Diaz. Well, that pursuit has already begun now, and it's important to make note that not only are the Mets in active talks with Alonso already, when it's only November 13th, 2025, and of course, talks beginning doesn't mean they're going to necessarily end anytime soon, but there is something to be said about this coming out in the media by Heyman, because as we know, John, of course, has a relationship with Scott Boras, to say the least. He broke the Juan Soto news last year, kind of a big deal, largest contract in North American sports history. If you're going to get that kind of scoop, I'm led to believe that obviously you're getting a lot of intel from Boras himself, and to varying degrees that has held true. And something that one has to ponder is, why is this being put out there? Is it because A, the Mets are actually getting talks done to a certain point, and you want to see if other suitors can be more aggressive outside the Mets to up his dollars? Is it B, the fact that his market has actually been very slow and they're really just trying to start to get it picked up now, which is why they're putting it out there? Is it 3 or C, however you want to say it, because of the fact that this is actually factual and things are just in good standing between both sides, and Scott Boras isn't trying to do any wrongs with Steve Cohen, as Steve Cohen has invested more in Scott Boras than any other owner in Major League Baseball since he became owner over the past 5 years. So I'd imagine it falls more in the category, hopefully, of the latter than anything else. But a big factor as to why there has been a massive question mark between the Mets bringing back Alonso or not hasn't necessarily been just on contract demands of seeking a longer-term deal, but more so on what his role will be in the organization for 2026 and beyond. And as you guys can see, shout out to Laura Albanese there on the beat for the Mets that you guys can see through Newsday. She came out with a piece that goes in hand with what we know Scott Boras stated to the media, but I'm just going to reaffirm it here. Alonso's willingness to DH makes him more attractive to the Mets and others. This is true. And inside, she goes on to expand on why that is important, that Alonso actually has more of an appetite to DH. And Stearns, the ability to get his bat in the lineup in multiple ways is helpful. It's great to know that Pete is open to it. And this is great news, because if Scott Boras is putting out there to everybody that Alonso actually has more of an appetite to DH, where he will not be stubborn if say, hey, we want to kind of split your reps a bit, where we know you're our first baseman, but there's going to be days that we have you at DH not only to help you for the sake of longevity, but also for the sake of maximizing the lineup both offensively and defensively. And I think we could all agree, if Pete Alonso is willing to DH either for a decent period of time and then eventually more of a significant period of time throughout a multi-year contract, there really isn't much up for debate as to whether or not the Mets should be doing everything in their power to bring Alonso back or not. They absolutely should be rolling out the red carpet, because Alonso, more as a DH profile, which I firmly believe he'll continue to profile as he gets older, because he's a defensive liability, to say the least at first. All the numbers will tell you that. The eye test will tell you that as well. Scoops are great, but you need more than that. Alonso has not been proficient in that area for any year in his career, with the exception of the 2023 season. So knowing that Alonso has been that liability at first base, if he has more of an appetite now to DH, I mean, this changes the game for the Mets. You don't really have to look far then to find your slugger who can thrive in your lap to give you north of 40 home runs, 130 RBIs every single season. And Alonso at the DH position would do, I think, wonders. Now, of course, there is a mental aspect to this that is very important. That is the simple fact that Alonso has been very prideful on being more of a full-time first baseman his entire career. That pride, I think, has gotten in the way of him and his marketability over the past calendar year. And he's had to learn from that, obviously, because he just is not a good defensive first baseman to have your foot down and say, I am only a first baseman. He can't be acting Rafi Devers pre-trade with the Boston Red Sox on, oh, I can't deviate away from third, when, buddy, you're in a good defensive third baseman. Bregman's going to do laps around you. Of course they want to move you out of that position. And now you're stubborn and won't play first when it would be for the betterment of the team. That is a clubhouse cancer to a certain degree, and that deserved the right to be parted with. For Alonso, I don't view him as much of a cancer as I do as someone who's just prideful on being a first baseman, doesn't want to lose the value there, but now understands that his value is lacking if he views himself as a full-time first baseman without any wiggle room of going in that DH spot. because by putting Alonso in DH for someone who had 38 home runs, just under 130 RBIs this past year, was over 30% above league average as a batter, which is very much what you should expect yearly from Alonso, but it would maximize the Mets lineup offensively and defensively in more ways than one. That would not only allow the Mets to continue their pursuit of Cody Bellinger that we broke down in yesterday's video, so make sure to check that out after you guys watch this one. We touched on it briefly at the end of our live stream last night as well. You can still go after Cody Bellinger, and that would actually make things very realistic, where you could have Bellinger get reps at first base, playing time with Alonso, as well as giving Bellinger reps in the outfield by giving some days off to, say, Soto, and giving Soto a day at DH, giving Nimmo a day at DH, and then when, say, Carson Bench blossoms and thrives fully at center field, if it's not right off the jump out of spring trading, then you could have Belly more as your first base corner outfield option and get creative. He is pretty much a Jeff McNeil on steroids, where you're getting a plus bat the way that McNeil isn't to the same degree. You're getting a guy that has World Series experience and championship experience, knows what it takes to win, and has dominated in all the markets from New York to Chicago to LA. The only one he hasn't done in the major markets for the most part at this point is Boston. So maybe that's the sign that he'll be your Boston Red Sox next. But the point is that Alonso having more of an appetite at DH changes the game for not only how the Mets evaluate him, but how a lot of other suitors evaluate him. So it's very encouraging to know that, per John Heyman of the New York Post, going back to the initial piece, that they're in good standing right now when it comes to how these talks are starting, having that clear understanding. Let's not forget the sit down that both Alonso, Boris, David Stearns, and Steve Cohen had that finally inked his contract an offseason ago. It was after a stalemate, after things didn't look too great. They got together there in Tampa, which obviously Pete is from that area. They got together, sat down, and Alonso said verbatim, listen, I'm going to be a 500-plus home run hitter in my career. I'm going to make the Hall of Fame, regardless if I'm repping the Mets orange and blue or not. And that is, truthfully, reigned true for Stearns and Cohen at the time, which quickly then led them to finally inking that contract at 2 years, $54 million. But this is going to be a different market for Alonso, and Alonso is going to get nothing short, in my opinion, of a 4 or 5 year deal. And I think 5 years is kind of right in the heart of what makes sense for a guy who's initially seeking 7. And if he has more of an appetite for DH as he gets older, who cares about him aging? He's in his early 30s right now. How many guys have we seen dominate constantly in the DH position as they get to their mid-30s because they're still perfectly primed with their bat? I mean, there's endless examples, and it's not just JD Martinez up until he became a New York Met, fittingly enough. It's not just Big Papi. There's just the Nelson Cruzes of the world. There's so many. I really do believe, and I felt this way for years on end, that Alonso can find himself as literally one of the best DHs that the game has ever seen if he just puts his mind to it, by not being a mental midget, by understanding his role, and making the proper adjustment from a guy that's used to fielding every day to now not being on the field for half the game and just knowing that you got to lock in solely on your offensive output. Imagine a world where Alonso was more at DH than anything else, and Buddy put another level to his offensive game. Imagine a world where Pete Alonso was potentially batting closer to 300 than he was 250 consistently throughout the entire season, beyond just the hot start of 2 months he had last season. Just imagine the potential upside with Alonso raking right in the heart of your lineup, and you have a viable offensive and defensive first base option, whether it's a Cody Bellinger, whether it's a Kazuma Okamoto, for example, who I really like in this year's market right now, who will not take nearly as much of a pretty penny to land him as Munetaka Murakami is going to, because their age difference around 4 years or so. So the point here is that for the Mets to be getting this kind of groundwork done with Alonso is huge this early in the offseason. Even if this is inevitably going to drag on and we're going to have a constant seesaw back and forth, I'm sure we're going to. That's how negotiations go. The big question is how much is Scott Boras kind of playing the media to a degree when looking at these negotiations? That is something only time will tell. We may very well find out more updates on this later on today, which is why I'm dropping this video earlier in the day at the time of it first coming out, because a lot's happening in the GM meetings right now, and of course, I'm sure I will have another good couple reasons to do another video and or live stream in the coming hours by the time you guys have already watched this. But it doesn't just stop there in this piece with Alonso. Something that I thought was very interesting was the fact that the Toronto Blue Jays, as we know, made a push for Pete Alonso last offseason. But reportedly, the Blue Jays offered basically double the contract that the Mets did, but it still didn't happen, and here's why. The Blue Jays initially offered a $100+ million contract to Pete Alonso last offseason, but then retracted it after the fact. So they initially had the offer on the table. Alonso probably didn't accept right away. waiting for the Mets to kind of and be in similar standing. And my time Alonso, and this is more my speculation than anything else, so don't take it more than a grain of salt if you don't want to, but I'd imagine that Alonso then circled back after still not getting the deal he was looking for, and the Blue Jays said, I'm sorry, you took too long, basically, and we're taking that off the board now, which put the Mets in a prime position to bring him back, because, again, every domino fell. Every team that needed a DH and or first base option last year got them through the free agent trade market, not named Pete Alonso. And I'm sure that really slighted Alonso then, and that was a great learning experience for him, heading into this market, how to do it right, how to make sure negotiations don't drag on too long. And let's call it how it is. If Alonso wants to return to the Mets and the Mets want him back, it's imperative for both sides to get a contract done sooner rather than later, so that way they can continue to be proactive and get the groundwork done this offseason outside of bringing back your top talents and Alonso and Diaz, because that is not what should be defining the Mets offseason by any point, because if it does, then we have a major problem. That means that the Mets, at most, their best moves this offseason were just bringing Alonso and Diaz back, but they did everything else on the margin, so they moved laterally in other moves, and you cannot do that after you had a losing season this year in the sense of not making playoffs. You cannot do that after seeing the LA Dodgers win back-to-back championships. You cannot do that entering year 6 with Steve Cohen as owner, and he has 3 of the first 5 years as losing seasons to look back on. You simply cannot sit on your hands and allow an Alonso negotiation to dictate your entire offseason, the same way that you also have to make sure you do everything in your power to bring him back. It's kind of a double-edged sword. If Alonso decides to drag this puppy out all the way till January again, the Mets may have to bite the bullet and deal with it. And if they don't, then naturally you have to deal with the reality that Alonso will not be in a Mets uniform anymore. And that's something that I don't think anyone wants to stomach, nor do I think David Stearns and Cohen want that to happen. So for all these reasons, I'm encouraged to see that this reporting has happened. Hopefully we find out more in the coming days that things are continuing in the right direction, negotiations, because it would be nothing short of a massive Christmas gift for myself and for many. Of course, it could be a different gift depending on, what religion or what holiday you would find yourself celebrating. But the point stands here is that if you can get Alonso linked down before winter meetings, oh my God, that changes the game for this team and how they can operate their negotiations this offseason. It changes everything for them in the best ways possible, because it allows David Stearns to have truly ample time to go after the areas of need for this team, from the rotation to the bullpen to other aspects of the position player market, in ways that we otherwise weren't maybe able to dabble in as much if Pete tries to drag this thing big time. And not that you can't negotiate with multiple players in multiple different areas, because you can, but Alonso's decision will directly impact how the Mets operate with evaluating plenty other player position options. And if Alonso takes a while and Akamoto's thing is heating up, his period, as we know, will be beginning soon, and they'll have a 45-day window, another Scott Boras client, you have to say to yourself, how much are the Mets going to prioritize this pursuit? Or are they just going to allow all the dominoes to fall, anticipating that Alonso's inevitably returning? And then what if Alonso doesn't return? And then you see Akamoto's off the board. Then you see Cody Bellinger's off the board. Then you see Josh Naylor's off the board. Then you see Alex Bregman's off the board. Then you see Bo Bichette's off the board. Even guys that maybe aren't the best team fit for the organization, but are the best bats out there. If they continue to go domino by domino, one by one after another, the Mets are really going to shoot themselves in the foot and then find themselves not in a good position, and a PR nightmare for David Stearns and for this, obviously, the reaction from fan base. And there's a whole lot of uncertainty heading into 2026. So this all goes without saying. Bring the polar bear back, Pete Alonso. Happy to see that things, as of now, appear to be trending in the right direction. Squeaking this one back in here. I have to record this after the fact, and I apologize for that. So if there's a little cut up in the video, that's why. I almost forgot to break down the great Nate Lavender, so let's briefly do that here. As you guys can see, the Mets announced that Nate Lavender has been returned to their AAA roster from the Rays. Lavender was selected in the 2024 Rule 5 draft, but missed the entire 2025 season due to injury. He also had surgery on a bone spur going back to August of this year, and that is why he was ultimately DFA'd by the Rays this last week. So the fact that he never played a game for Tampa, he gets returned back to the organization. And while I wouldn't get overly excited about this, because there's a lot of uncertainty with Lavender, and there's one thing we know about Nate Lavender, it's that this man was the story of the Mets reliever options in 2024 in the spring training. As you guys can see, here's some highlights of him striking out the side and doing so, and I understand spring training, but what was most notable about Lavender was not only the arsenal that he was building, that was very much in hand with the Mets pitching lab at the time, but also that he was pulling some Nestor Cortez leg kick nonsense, where he was holding his leg up for extended period of time and would fluctuate a bit. See, like the hezzy right there, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Just those little things that you see to throw off those batters with the timing. He was doing a really good job of it, then sadly went down with injury, and we haven't really seen him since the past a year and a half or so. So Nate Lavender is looking to make a name for himself in this upcoming spring training for the Mets, and he will have a great opportunity to do so as he'll be competing against guys like Dickie Lovelady, among other lesser lefty options that are looking to compete for a bullpen spot from the outside looking in. Because as we know, the Mets' certain options in their bullpen, a certainty rather, are AJ Minter and Brooks Raley when looking at southpaws. Can Nate Lavender find himself in that regard? Yes. I think if Lavender gets healthy and looks similar to how he did a couple springs ago, I will not be shocked if the Mets utilize him sooner than later. That would be very much a David Stearns thing to do. So Nate Lavender, I don't really got much else to relay on how he's done at the major league level because we have really yet to see that. But a guy who was once coveted in the organization, unfortunately went down with injury. Mets needed the roster room, had to make him available for the Rule 5 draft. The Rays, who would have loved to use him because they love to churn out pitching in that way, pick him up, don't get a chance to use him because he goes down with injury, and then has another surgery that, of course, prolongs his ability to get back to being properly ready for next year. So, Nate Lavender, happy to have you back. It's unfortunate that's under the circumstance, but let's see what you can do and hopefully provide this Mets team out of spring training beginning next year. It appears Tyrone Taylor will be tendered a contract even as the Mets look for a solution at center field. We'd love to have a plus defender out there. I think Tyrone Taylor is a plus defender, so that's a good start to have him under control right now, Stearns said to the media. Shout out to Laura again with her great reporting there on the beat in Vegas for the GM meetings. And expand more on Tyrone Taylor, everybody, I would like to let you all know that it is okay that the Mets are going to be tendering him a contract and bringing him back. Believe it or not, everything will be fine in that regard, and here's why. Should the Mets add an outfielder this offseason, they're clearly going to do someone that's an upgrade over Tyrone Taylor, right? We saw David Stearns speak to the media on how much he views highly of Carson Bench, on how he could crack this team out of camp next year. And that's also a topic we broke down in yesterday's video, paired with Cody Bellinger, so check that out in case you guys haven't already again. But TT is a guy that we know can't hit a beach ball sometimes offensively, can be a massive liability there, but is so good defensively that he still was a plus WAR player per Fangraphs this year. He was +6 defensively. Offensively, not so great. That's why he was 30% below league average in his 113-game sample size. Only 2 home runs, 27 RBIs, and 12 stolen bags. Not a lot to love, but TT is more of a vibes guy, fastball-heavy guy, and honestly a guy that can really clutch up for you off the bench. Tyrone Taylor is just someone that we don't enjoy too much as more of a starting center fielder because we know what his ceiling is and we know what his floor is. And it's just not attractive to have him in there on a daily basis. I love his defense. He's a great late game replacement. He's a great guy to come in and pinch hit for a guy that's looking for fastball hunting, depending on the pitcher he's facing. But outside that, you're left kind of, picking only little aspects of him that you may enjoy, including the base running, because he's an elite base runner, fast as hell, the fastest player on this team outside of Luis Angel Acuna, and that's not an exaggeration. He's that quick. But Tyrone Taylor is someone who I think just makes sense to bring back. He's still under club control until 2027. It'll be silly not to have him rostered as of now, knowing the uncertainty in the Mets outfield. Now, should the Mets say sign a Cody Bellinger, trade for Luis Robert, bring back Harrison Bader, or just do something that is a stopgap option with potentially higher upside in center field? Should they wish to go down, should they actually go ahead and go down that route, that is where Tyrone Taylor could find himself more boxed down the outside looking in. And I do think that will naturally happen throughout the course of the year for the Mets in 2026. I think Tyrone will begin the year with the Mets, but he may not necessarily finish the year with the Mets, if you guys understand what I'm trying to say there. So now going on from Tyrone Taylor, let's continue our conversation. Let's get here to one center field option from one to another. And now let's get into Byron Buxton. Byron Buxton may be open to waiving his no-trade clause for certain contenders if the Twins keep selling off pieces, per Dan Haynes, MLB. Now, that is one thing to take away. The bigger takeaway I have is that not only is Byron Buxton potentially having an appetite for the first time in his career to be traded from his longtime team in the Minnesota Twins, it's the fact that other reporting that came out yesterday stated that the New York Mets did in fact reach out to the Twins regarding Byron Buxton and his availability at last year's trade deadline. And by last year, I mean this past season, which tells you that the Mets obviously view Byron in high regard and at the right price would be in favor of having him. And the Mets have actually nipped at the heels of Byron Buxton in his market multiple times over different regimes, going from Zach Scott that we saw in 2021-2022 range, to Billy Epler, to now David Stearns. And you can't fault anyone for having a level of interest in Byron Buxton. I have been kicking and screaming and crying for him to be traded to the Mets, going over 5 years now. It's been 5 years. And since that time, Byron has not been able to stay consistently afloat with his availability. The biggest problem with Byron Buxton is not his play, but his inability to stay healthy. And that alone is why I'm sure to some of you guys, you may say to yourself, Byron Buxton makes no sense for the Mets. If they're trying to add certainty, he is far from it. And I completely understand that argument entirely. I'm not here to sell you on Byron Buxton staying healthy for the rest of his career, because that would literally be silly. He's not the type of guy. He's only had seasons of 100 games or more only a couple times in his career at this point. But the reason why Byron Buxton is so coveted is not only the stat line that you guys see down below, which is arguably the best stat line that he's had in his career at this point. 35 home run season for Byron, 83 RBIs, 24 stolen bags. And that's a really important stat there in the stolen base front, because Byron went a good stretch of time not stealing bags because he's just been so injury prone. The fastest man on the planet, the best five-tool talent, in my opinion, in baseball when he was really bursting on the scene. It was all just about putting it together with the bat consistently and staying healthy. The man's a human highlight reel. Literally, I do not believe I've found someone in baseball outside of Shohei Ohtani that has truly been more visually impressive when at their best and healthy than Byron Buxton. The power is absurd. The defensive range is amazing. His ability to steal bags is effortless. Just the reason why he's been hesitant to do that over the years has been his lack of health. But a 35 home run season, the best in his career that we've seen at this point, a 5 WAR year, a plus offensive and defensive player, 36% above league average, is under club control until the 2029 offseason, which means that we have another, say, 4 years or so of Byron Buxton. So that would bring him to around age 35, age 36. But just for some context, at around that age, that is not far off from what the age was when the Mets signed Starling Marte. The Mets signed Starling Marte, entering right around his age 34, age 35 season. So if the Mets invested in Byron Buxton, you would still be getting a guy that can bring you defensive plus value as well as a bat that would just do so much good in this lineup with everyone else in company. So here's what lies the big reason as to why I anticipate the Mets will be having a level of degree of interest in Buxton's market again. It's not just because they saw him to a certain degree at this past season's trade deadline, but it's also the fact that right now, Byron Buxton can easily fit this roster with the following. Trade for Byron Buxton. Yes, you're going to have to give up a solid amount of assets for him because he's under very good AAV. Even though the years aren't the most ideal, very good AAV, even for him at the age of 31 right now. Give up the assets that'll take to land him. Won't be absurd, but will be a decent amount naturally for a Twins team that's more in a retool rebuild. Have him be your center fielder. Once Carson Bench shows he's ready, whether that's not long out of spring training or in the second half of the year, give Bench his reps and allow Buxton to be versatile. Give Buxton reps in the corner outfields. For the time you do that, put Nimmo at DH and or Soto. What you can also do here, give Buxton reps at DH to improve his longevity and his ability to stay healthy in the lineup. A guy who can steal bags for you at a quality rate of 20 plus a year. A guy who can give you north of 30 plus home runs a year when he's right. 20 to 30, very impactful. Clutch with runners in scoring position, hits absolute tanks. And is a fan favorite of so many in Minneapolis for more reasons than one. I'm sure he would be in Flushing, Queens as well. And he has the moxie. He has everything you want. It just comes down to health. But if you want to prolong his ability to stay healthy, put him more in the DH role. Have him platoon times between himself and Alonso, should he bring Alonso back. It really isn't that hard to fathom once you kind of just put the pieces together. Get creative. Get creative and maximize your offensive and your defensive output. Soto can deserve DH reps some days. Nimmo most certainly can deserve DH reps some days. Alonso can as well. And that's an ability to actually continue this rotating or revolving door, if you will, for the Mets at DH while actually improving it for the better. The Mets have missed the mark so bad with their DH position since it's become universal over the past couple of years. And what I mean by that is they have not prioritized true power in said position. They went with these silly, nonsensical platoon splits that initially I thought would work, but in hindsight, they really haven't. The Mets have had more harm come out of that DH position than good because they haven't had the true power production that a team is looking to have year after year in said position. By rotating a DH spot, Pete Alonso, Byron Buxton, Brennan Nimmo, Juan Soto, What do all these 4 players have in common? They're all guys that are plus power bats for you. All guys that have potential to give you 20 to 30 or absolute most 40 plus home runs. And obviously this varies depending on who talking about, from WardyNYM to Buxton to Soto, etc. But point stands, the Mets would have a consistency at that DH position where power would stay true while keeping guys relatively fresh and healthy and getting creative with your lineup configurations, which I know Carlos Mendoza appreciates. I think that's a really happy medium for the Mets to go down should they actually go out of their way to seek Byron Buxton. And for the Twins here, why wouldn't you do everything in your power to try to trade Byron now? He isn't getting any younger. He's on a favorable contract when looking at AAV. It's not too many years. And he's coming off of the best season of his career, you could rightfully argue. If you're in Minnesota, you're trying to maximize that value now. And in order to do so, you just have to continue to reiterate to Byron that we're going into retool/rebuild. We're going to trade away more guys, and we're not going to be winning anytime soon. So I don't know why you think we're going to, right? If Byron understands that, he'll then waive his no-move clause, and he could find himself with a team like the Mets or a rival like the Phillies who would love him, which is another thing to bear in mind. If Byron gets traded, not only is he inevitably coming to the National League more than likely, but he's likely coming to a National League contender. Do you want that National League contender to be a team not named the New York Mets? Do you want that to be the LA Dodgers? Do you want that to be the Philadelphia Phillies? Do you want that to be the San Diego Padres? All those teams would love him in their lineup right now and would fit their defensive configuration in the outfield for the most part. That should concern you if Byron Buxton gets dealt. So for all those reasons and then some, if you're going to go after Byron Buxton, go after him with the expectation that he will be a key piece to your puzzle in the outfield, but not someone that has to be in the outfield for every single rep. Give him a balance from outfield to DH, and I assure you that'll not only maximize his ability to stay healthy, but it could really maximize and lengthen this Mets offense and defense in ways that we have not seen in previous seasons. So now, guys, going on from Byron Buxton, who I love and I will always love, no matter what happens with him. As long as, another team, the Atlanta Braves, I'll literally throw up if that happens. And we've been concerned about that in previous years. Need Byron Buxton in the National League East and the New York Mets uniform, and that's what I got to say about that. And again, fits the mold for this team in more ways than one. Can work even with Carson Bench and the full. Just get a little creative. That's all it is. And at absolute worst, maybe the Mets can get a guy like WardyNYM a year from now to be more willing to waive some of his no-move clauses. There's no trade status. Easier said than done, I'm aware, but just things we can ponder or worry more about should we get there. Now, going on from Byron Buxton, last but not least, and what a snag by Byron. Look at this stud. Just an absolute beast. That's Byron Buxton right there. And it's like Tyrone Taylor's defense plus elite hitter. And that's Byron Buxton. That's what you want, the true package right there. And that's why he's been injury prone so much, because the guy lays it out. He gives it all. He is a true ball player, and I respect that about Byron, and I would respect him even more if he finally comes to terms that he's never going to win anything with the Minnesota Twins. Not to suggest that he's going to win a World Series with the Mets, so I'm not trying to flex those guns. It's not like we have this great history of winning, but what we do have is an optimism level, an owner that's clearly driven more than ever, and a team that is obviously in the right direction from farm to talent on the roster to a degree in ways that the Twins simply cannot compete with. But now, guys, it's Ketel Marte time. At least 7 teams have already inquired on Ketel Marte this offseason. Now, this comes just a day or so after Bob Nightingale of USA Today came out with a piece stating that Ketel Marte is likely to be on the market this offseason. And I'm not surprised by this. I actually did a video on the top 10 players that will be traded this offseason on my WardyMLB YouTube channel, and Ketel Marte is on the thumbnail. And I made that video a week ago, so that was before any of this reporting came out, because it was common sense that Marte's name would be a hot trade chip to consider this offseason after the turmoil he had this past year with the Diamondbacks. Now, in case you guys are unaware of what I'm referring to, there was some drama kind of going on with Marte on and off the field with the Diamondbacks, and basically on where he was in a period of time where he maybe wasn't around the team right away, among others, and they made it a bigger thing than what I believe it was at the time, and Ketel was upset. He also, unfortunately, had some emotional stints throughout the year, because if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, but if I'm not mistaken, Ketel Marte's mother had passed. I don't know how long ago exactly, but there was someone that made derogatory remarks to him about that exact situation that got him to the point of being tearful. And I think it was a Chicago White Sox fan when it happened earlier this season, but don't quote me on it. please do your due diligence yourself and check it out. I'm just saying from what I remember happening throughout the summer, because I do remember this going on with Ketel, and it was very unfortunate. But Marte, even though he's entering now his age 32, age 33 season, the guy's literally one of the best players in baseball. He's a top 10 and top 15 player deemed by many. And yes, I know you say to yourself, why in God's name would the New York Mets go out of their way to trade for a second base option, as if they don't have a million second base options from Brett Beatty when he's not at third base, to Jeff McNeil, to a degree Ronnie Mauricio and Luis Angel Acuna, to obviously a larger degree Jeff McNeil, should you in fact not trade him. Here's the thing though, you're going to trade Jeff McNeil this offseason because it makes most sense for the organization for a multitude of reasons, but it starts with, if you want to give Jet Williams, your top infield prospect, a leash this year, you can't have him blocked by an aging 35-year-old veteran whose best value at this point in his career is his versatility than anything else. It just doesn't make sense. But does it make sense for the New York Mets to trade away Jet Williams to bring in a star talent like Ketel Marte? And I see both sides of the coin here. I see how you could see a Jet Williams thriving and the Mets buying into like 2 good years of Ketel Marte, and then he starts to fall off. He's under contract until 2031. Do the math right now. Okay, we have like another 6 years or so, 5-6 years. You're telling me that Ketel Marte is under contract really until his late 30s, just like what Starling Marte was with the Mets. How fitting would that be? And in similarity to Starling Marte, I think you're only going to be getting about 2 really good quality years out of Ketel Marte. I could be wrong. He could be entering his age 35 and 36 season still being a stud with the bat. But the point is that he's already peaked in his career offensively. He's not getting any younger. How much of that is a needle mover for a Mets team when they have a youth movement headlined by Jet Williams? How much do they value Jet? And I really don't know where they stand there. I think David Stearns does not view Jet as highly as Carson Bench, to say the least. Nor do I think the Mets just want to give him up for nothing. But Ketel Marte is an exception. And you say to yourself, are you willing to risk giving up a potential future fit for you in the infield for an immediate need in Ketel Marte now? And my personal response to that is yes. Ketel Marte would not only make this Mets lineup tremendous for next season, even with an Alonso reunion. I mean, oh my God, if you had Ketel Marte in this infield, that would be the type of needle mover move. That is the kind of move that puts the Mets more in the Dodgers category of conversation than it does just trying to make playoffs. And it might not be an easy one to stomach. You may have your concerns longer term about the deal. The AAV is great, but my response to that is, if it doesn't look good, Cohen will lead it like he has done with the James McCann contract, like the Robinson Cano contract, and others inevitably happening down the line. The Mets are in a win-now stage with Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, potentially Alonso, and Diaz returning. Why not maximize this window when you have a clear opportunity to do so? And when you have a farm that's deeper than ever, and a Arizona Diamondbacks team right now that's pondering kind of going to more of a retool/rebuild phase. Marte would change this infield in more ways than one. It would make this Mets team go from being good to great in that regard. It would put less pressure on Brett Beatty to have to be that certainty at third base constantly. And it would bring in a veteran, but unlike Jeff McNeil, is just so polished of a hitter. I mean, let's just take a look at Ketel Marte's numbers. And I'm not saying he's going to put up all these same as a Met, because again, he's not getting any younger. I think he's already peaked in his career, but I do think that he will, of course, still provide a lot of value. 28 home runs this year, 36 the year prior, 25 the year before that, and then a couple of years of 14 and 12. Marte had some wishy-washy years that we saw there in the early 2020s. But you go back to the juice baseball era there, like him and Eduardo Escobar were raking back then. Shout out to Escobar and Fogo de Chao, if you know, you know. But 32 bombs in his age 25 season there that we saw. So Marte has put up at least 25 home runs or more each of the past 3 seasons. Has put up at least 87 runs scored or more each of those years. And while he's not known for stealing bags, maybe that's something that he grows a greater appetite to, the way that Juan Soto was able to this year. You know, he has more speed than Juan, and I think can be very much so effective on the base pass, and has stayed an unbelievably consistent high contact hitter, has been balanced in his on base. That's why he has a 351 career on base, and the slug has been over 500 each of the past 2 years and was almost over 500 for 3 consecutive seasons. You're looking at a guy that collectively has been right around 35 to 40+% above league average over the past 3 seasons. You're looking at a player that also has been at least a 4-WAR player and at most a 6-WAR player over these past 3 seasons. So that kind of value would be instrumental in this Mets infield. You have the bat, and you look at a Mets team that should Alonso return, and let's just say hypothetically here, the Mets brought in Ketel Marte, and they signed an outfield option that maybe isn't Cody Bellinger good, but is solid. You're looking at Juan Soto, Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso, Ketel Marte, Francisco Alvarez, who I know is very determined to get off to the right start next season, Brett Beatty. There's a lot of pieces here. And the Mets go from looking like a team that had a lot of uncertainty to looking like one of the favorites in the National League yet again. But this time for rightful reason. So that's what I have to say about Ketel Marte. I see both sides of the coin. I understand the pros. I understand the cons. But what I understand more than anything is the Mets' adamancy to win now while they have the window to do so. Not that they won't have a continued window with their great farm, but Lindor, Soto, Nimmo, these guys are not getting any younger. You do not want to put yourself in a position where by the time you finally get all the other surrounding cast right, these guys are three grizzled vets that can't provide the same level of productivity that you were hoping that they would because you already wasted their primes. This holds true far more with Lindor and Nimmo than it does Soto, obviously, given their age difference. But you guys understand the point I'm trying to make. Maximize these windows while you have them before it's too late. Ketel Marte, Byron, Buxton, I would love either. Is either going to land with the Mets? We'll soon find out. I'd imagine that Byron is more likely to come in the Mets than Marte because, one, the Mets have already shown an appetite to trade for Byron over this past calendar year, and B, Byron actually fits more of that immediate area of need for this Mets team in ways that Marte doesn't. Marte would be added to an abundance that the Mets would then have to part ways with other guys for actually making room for him because that's how much depth they have in their middle infield. So that's all I got for you, though, everybody. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis to all the following topics that we had in the comments down below. I really, really do appreciate it. And whether the Mets bring in Ketel Marte, Byron Buxton, Pete Alonso, or none of these guys, rest assured we will cover every aspect of it all on the platform as we do all offseason long. Thank you guys again. And as always, no matter what, let's go Mets, baby. Peace out, folks.